Watch this vidcast, or I'll gouge your eyes out.
Welcome back, horror hounds, to Ghostman and Rivera's Horror Show podcast.
I'm Mike Ghostman Pickle.
And I'm James Rivera. Before we get started discussing the movies we watched this week, we have to get to...
Horror Show news.
Ghostface being resurrected for new Scream film.
Guy Pearce to star in a Fangoria-produced horror film, The Seventh Day.
Halloween Kills wraps production.
Elijah Wood wants to remake A Nightmare on Elm Street.
The Invisible Man trailer finally drops.
And Mike Flanagan's Dr. Sleep finally opens this weekend.
So, Spyglass Media Group is developing a new Scream film. Spyglass Media acquired the rights to all Dimension Films assets after the allegations against Harvey Weinstein put the company into bankruptcy. They're also going to be producing a new Hellraiser movie. As of right now, Kevin Williamson is not writing the screenplay, which is not good news.
Troubling.
Yes, and it is unconfirmed whether or not it will be a remake or a continuation of the original mythology. I feel like Scream is even harder to make a sequel to now than most horror franchises, because I know that people do, like, different versions of Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th and Halloween. They've been reinterpreted so many times.
Yeah.
Every Scream film is uniformly Wes Craven's in its direction and in its style. And even though Scream 3 lacks the Kevin Williamson screenplay, and it's the weakest of the 4 Scream films. So I am a little bit skeptical about this because Scream to me is Kevin Williamson and Wes Craven working in collaboration. With Wes Craven gone and Kevin Williamson possibly not writing the script, I have very serious doubts as to whether a new Scream movie could be very good.
And they already beat the franchise to death with the TV series anyway.
Yeah.
Three different seasons.
Even at its best, the Scream series really did not touch the original film quadrilogy.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of it will depend on the director.
How much passion they're putting into it.
Yeah. But I don't think this is something a really good director would want to touch.
No.
You know?
I don't feel like Scream is not something that you could repeat over again. The phenomenon, what it tapped into the time, and at the time, what it meant for slasher movies in the 1990s. It was one of those movies that hit the cultural zeitgeist just at the right time and became a classic. The meta, self-aware slasher film is not going to seem as fresh in 2019 or 2020 as it did in 1996 or 1997.
The series didn't capture it without Kevin Williamson, so I have no reason to believe that they would capture it in another movie.
You're listening to Ghostman and Rivera's Horror Show podcast.
Guy Pearce is going to star in a Fangoria-produced horror film. It's a possession film described as The Exorcist Meets Training Day, written and directed by Justin B. Lang.
It's called The Seventh Day, correct?
Yeah, The Seventh Day. The premise is a renowned exorcist teams up with a rookie priest for his first day of training. As they plunge deeper into hell on earth, the lines between good and evil blur, and their own demons emerge. Justin B. Lang, the director, said in a statement, "This is a story about the rising spread of a pervasive evil. We live in an increasingly dark world, one where it is difficult to know who to trust or what to believe. It's a scary time, and scary times call for scary movies." Guy Pearce is an extraordinary talent, the rare combination of bona fide movie star and consummate artist. I can't wait for audiences to see what he has in store for them with this role, and production begins January 2020.
I can only hope it's a fun movie because the premise doesn't sound too serious. The idea of a Training Day style exorcist is ripe for...
One moment.
Damn Siri always
Why
going
did
off.
Siri think that we were calling her? What did we say?
It's all the technology. It's watching us. It's listening to us.
Yeah.
It's tracking everything we do.
I'm not
everything
sure.
that we say.
I'm not sure I understand. You're not supposed to understand. The hell out of here.
Anyways, it sounds like it could be a really fun B movie. I expect it to be kind of an action horror, maybe, if you're going to try to do the Training Day template.
Well, this sounds almost exactly like the Exorcist series with Geena Davis. It was kind of a takeoff on the original Exorcist movie, but they kind of took it further where it was this young priest in training. Of course, it's a series, so they're going to take that further. And it kind of shit the bed in season 2, but season 1 was really good. But it sounds like almost the same type of thing. And as soon as I heard that it was Exorcist meets Training Day, it's like, oh, it must be one priest training another.
One of them is probably going to end up being a bad priest working for Satan.
Yeah, maybe one of them's a little weak and lets the devil in or something like that. So if Guy Pearce is involved, I mean, he's no slouch.
He doesn't do too much these days, though.
Yeah.
I mean, he was in Iron Man 3.
Yeah.
I mostly think of Guy Pearce from Memento. This is another one. I don't know what to say about it. It could be really good or it could be really bad. I like that Fangoria is producing these films because at the very least we know it's being produced by people who know, understand, and love the horror genre.
Yeah.
And that is more meaningful than if some big studio was behind this.
And the director sounds excited about it.
Listen to this podcast, or I'll gut you.
So Halloween Kills wraps production. Damn, wasn't that fast?
Yeah.
I feel like we just talked about it. Like we just heard about Halloween, the 2 sequels coming out. Before you know it was shooting. The script was already done by the time they announced it. Moving along really fast. It's going to be released on October 16, 2020. Jamie Lee Curtis said that the new one will really unpack the events of the original Halloween. I hope it doesn't explain things too much.
Yeah.
Kyle Richards is reprising her role as little Lindsay Wallace, so she's coming back. Nancy Stevens will reprise the role of Marion Chambers. She's the nurse that's traveling with Dr. Loomis in the original one.
Yeah.
When Michael Myers jumps on the car, puts his hand over her, and then she jumps out the car. Charles Cyphers to reprise his role as Sheriff Lee Brackett. So Annie Brackett's father is back.
I always liked him.
Anthony Michael Hall will be playing Tommy Doyle, so that's a new casting. Robert Longstreet will be reprising the role of the bully, Lonnie Lamb. The first teaser of Halloween Kills will show how Michael Myers survived the end of Halloween 2018. Seems like they're going for some real deep cuts with this one, where they're getting every little small part from the original. What kind of role would Lonnie Lamb play in this? As far as I knew in the first one, he never encountered Michael Myers.
Shut up.
So this just wraps production, so I presume that means Halloween Ends is going to be starting production soon and will be wrapping soon, and that will be released the following year. They showed some set photos of the old characters together. Nancy Stevens has apparently been wanting to... Not Nancy Stevens. Kyle Richards has apparently really wanted to be Lindsay Wallace again for a long time. She's on one of those Real Housewife TV shows.
Oh, okay.
So she's actually never really left the spotlight. She just took it up in a different way. But now she's back in movies.
I'm excited about this whole thing because I'm one of the people who really liked
Halloween
2018.
Let's see what they mean when they say really unpack the events of the original Halloween. That could mean a dozen different things.
Yeah, don't unpack them too much.
Yeah, I like that this is in the Halloween universe where Michael Myers is still the shape.
The next story has to do with Elijah Wood. He wants to remake A Nightmare on Elm Street. Now, this isn't happening. This is just a dream project of him and his partner from Spectre Vision, Daniel Noah. So, and he actually wants to direct it. And Daniel Noah recently said, "We've made no secret. We've been in touch with the rights holders many times. It's a real dream project for us to have a chance to make a film in that franchise." And Elijah Wood said, "With a lot of these classic horror films that have seen so many sequels, eventually it sort of plays itself out a little bit. It's also interesting to think about what we could do with a franchise like that, which reinvents itself or creates something that is playing with the tone and the key of the franchise, but is doing it differently or taking it in a slightly new direction. It's a fun way to think about those things."
Well, as of right now, it's only a pie-in-the-sky dream. The fact that they are in contacts with the rights holders shows that it's a little bit more than a small possibility. I imagine they're going to jump at it as soon as possible.
Yeah, and if they come out and say something, they obviously have some positive responses from the show, the rights holders.
What I really like, what I find interesting about Elijah Wood's quote is when he says, "It's interesting to think about what we could do with a franchise like that, which reinvents itself or creates something that is playing with the tone and key of the franchise, but taking it in a slightly new direction." That kind of reminds me of what Wes Craven's New Nightmare was. I feel like the Wes Craven, when he came back for the 7th film in the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, he did that. He acknowledged the past, fixed what he didn't like, fucked with the tone a little bit, changed the direction, and made Freddy scary again, and made the 7th film in a slasher film franchise extremely original. Yeah. So hopefully they can do something as good or almost as good as Wes Craven's return to the series, if they're going to really try to play with the tone and try to invert the mythology a little bit. I hope they don't do a remake.
Yeah.
I'd rather see something of a continuation of the Nightmare on Elm Street universe.
Or what if it's a continuation of the new Nightmare universe, which is totally different than the Nightmare on Elm Street universe?
Ooh.
What if it remains meta in the real world?
I would like that a lot. But that's another thing. You're going to have to live up to Wes Craven's New Nightmare, which for me, that's one of the best horror movies of the 1990s.
Yeah.
So we shall see. And this is granted that they do get it. If they're announcing it this much, if they, like you said, they probably have gotten really good responses. If anybody were to be in charge of the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, I'd rather have it be people like this, fans who genuinely love it and want to do something new with the franchise. I'd rather have it be that than just be some sort of cash grab that some producer wanted just so they could milk the franchise a little bit more. And I know these guys are actually going to try to make it with love.
Yeah, I'm interested in anything that Elijah Wood puts out.
The imaginative way that A Nightmare on Elm Street plays out as compared to most slashers, the dream aspect or the meta aspect where Freddy enters the real world, there's more possibilities and openness in the storytelling than there is for a character like Jason or even a character like Michael Myers.
Well, Elijah Wood's brushes with horror have been pretty interesting so far, going all the way back to The Good Son. Produced Cooties, and he was in the Maniac remake. To hear him talk about it, he's really passionate about the horror genre, and he really wants to bring something fresh. And
he's been on a roll with his production company with producing quality indie low-budget horror films.
Tune into Ghostman and Rivera's horror show.
And the Invisible Man trailer drops. So we've been reporting on Lee Whannell's reimagining of the classic Universal Studios monster movie, The Invisible Man. We've been following this story for a while, and especially after Upgrade, I'm really looking forward to seeing what Lee Whannell does as a filmmaker. And since the trailer dropped, we are going to do what we like to do here on the podcast. We're going to play it for you right now.
As the attorney representing Adrian's trust, I'm required to read
Elizabeth Moss.
Statement. Cecilia, although our relationship was far from perfect,
She was so good on Mad Men.
I thought that you would talk to me rather than run away.
So she seems like she's on the run. Oh, shit. There's an abusive husband.
Yeah.
He cut his wrist for his final wishes.
He committed suicide
$1 million. Contingent
and left her with millions of dollars.
mentally incompetent.
Blumhouse Productions.
Make any sense?
What?
Adrian wouldn't kill himself.
Listen, you're getting your freedom.
Oh, yeah, it's the guy from Haunting of Hill House.
Oh, yes.
I want you.
Hello? I'm scared.
You don't have to be scared of him anymore.
He was a sociopath, completely in control.
This is quite a reimagining of The Invisible Man.
Yeah.
I like it, though. At least they're not repeating something. They're just riffing on the mythology of it.
I trust Lee Whannell, too, in his writing.
Universal Pictures presents.
What I'm experiencing. You need help. Adrian is dead. I went to his house today. He's not dead.
I have a pile of ashes in a box that would disagree with you.
He has figured out a way to be invisible.
The only thing more brilliant.
This is a very modernized take on the story.
Yeah.
Even in death. Adrian's true genius was how he got in people's heads. Don't come any closer.
I'm not crazy. Please listen to me.
You're saying the person trying to kill you is in the room right now, but we can't see him.
He's listening. Where are you? Where are you? Show yourself!
Heavy thriller elements of this movie, too.
Yeah.
Elizabeth Moss. Ooh, some violence in the trailer. February 2020. Hell yeah.
A lot of people getting the shit beat out of them by an invisible force.
Oliver Jackson Cohen from The Haunting of Hill House is the Invisible Man. That guy is fucking handsome.
Yeah.
Shut your mouth or I'll rip your lips off.
Hell yeah, I'm fucking excited for this movie. Elizabeth Moss has been good in Mad Men. She was good in Us. I haven't seen The Handmaid's Tale.
Yeah, I hear good things.
I've heard good things about it, but the subject matter sounds extremely depressing. I'll get around to it someday, but that's not high on my list of things that I want to see.
It reminded me of 100 Feet with Famke Janssen. Mm-hmm. It's where she's under house arrest for killing her husband. She killed her abusive husband for beating her all the time, and then he comes back from the dead and beats her some more, and beats the shit out of her boyfriend and stuff. And it's got a campy edge to it that this one doesn't seem to have to it, but it's very reminiscent of the story.
So this one seems like it's a more serious take on that topic, though.
Yeah, and I know that Lee Whannell is very creative with his writing, so I know he's going to take it to some cool places. And I personally love the look of invisible forces beating the shit out of people. Our final story in the news is Mike Flanagan's Dr. Sleep opens wide this weekend. And I cannot wait. It had some early screenings, but I didn't get a chance to go to any of those.
It screened a week early for one night, for one showing at night. I know a lot of people saw it. I'll be watching it sometime this weekend.
I'm hearing mostly good things.
I've heard a little bit of mixed things. I've heard mostly good things. One of the most interesting things that I keep hearing is that Stephen King has now softened his stance on Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, which for years he has trashed over and over and talks about how he hates it and how it's an awful adaptation.
Yeah.
Now he sees it in a different light thanks to this new film. And I guess Mike Flanagan really was trying to bridge the world between Kubrick and King to make both versions compatible without canceling each other out. Obviously, the biggest difference is that this one, the Overlook Hotel, is going to play a big part. And I haven't read Dr. Sleep, but I do know for a fact that the Overlook Hotel is not in Dr. Sleep. It was burned to the ground at the end of Stephen King's novel version of The Shining.
But the showdown at the end of Dr. Sleep does take place where the Overlook Hotel burned down. It just wasn't standing. Stephen King didn't go for it right away. He said no at first because Mike Flanagan just came to him and said that he wanted to be as faithful as he could with Dr. Sleep, but he wanted to include elements of Kubrick's The Shining. And he just said no.
Because Stephen King wrote Dr. Sleep with the intent to erase Stanley Kubrick's version of The Shining.
Yeah, and he said he can't do that. It's burnt to the place is burnt to the ground at the beginning of Dr. Sleep,
The balls on Mike Flanagan to go up to Stephen King and tell him, we're going to make an adaptation of your novel Dr. Sleep and we're going to make it faithful, but we're going to make it a sequel to Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, even though you wrote that book to erase Stanley Kubrick's The Shining.
Well, he was insistent on it, though. He went back and reworked the idea and took it back to Stephen King again, but this time he had included elements where it takes elements that were missing in Kubrick's The Shining and adds it back to the story. So that's what Stephen King ended up really liking.
And I guess that makes sense because, like any film, you're only seeing the most important parts of a story that happen. And The Shining takes place over the span of months, and the movie is only 2 hours and 20 minutes worth of the months that the Torrances actually spend in the hotel.
Yeah.
So it makes sense, and it doesn't violate any of the mythology to include events that didn't make it into the Kubrick film because a lot of other shit must have happened in between.
Yeah. And then to say it's just another perspective, just a kid's perspective of what happened. So
I kind of like that angle because it's kind of like not erasing either one and it's letting them both stand. Because one of Stephen King doesn't like Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, partially because he feels that it's a very cold movie. You don't get the warmth off of Jack Torrance or the sense that he's a loving, caring father. It's just very cold and alien. But from Danny's perspective, a little kid who's 6 years old, he probably wouldn't be able to see all the nuance and the warmth. All he would remember is a very cold alien experience and this giant ogre chasing after him with an axe and acting psychotic.
It must be a really good idea because Stephen King held on to that hate for The Shining for years and years and years, and pretty recently he was still talking shit about it.
And now he says he has a different stance. And Mike Flanagan said he felt very accomplished when after the Dr. Sleep was over, he told Mike Flanagan, "You've changed my view on The Shining." So he must feel very accomplished that he's the man who changed Stephen King's mind about Kubrick's version of The Shining.
I bet, and I bet he's the only one, if one of the only ones, if not the only one, who could do that. Mike Flanagan. Before we get to the ones that we watched this week, we have a little announcement from the show. As many of you know, Gargoyle Media works with us on the horror show to produce it. We trade off on we work on each other's shorts, and we're all creatives, and we kind of collaborate together on the show. Well, they did their own short film,
independent of the show.
Yeah, independent of the show, called Lich Steve, and it played at the BlizzCon. And it got first place in the community video contest. 50,000 people watched it and loved it and was cheering for them. So, congratulations, Gargoyle
Media, on your success. Last week, Mike and I ran down the films that we watched. And one of the movies that I discussed was The Lighthouse. I gave my little view on it. And Michael hadn't seen it at the time. And we had promised you that when Michael saw it, we would come back and have a more in-depth back-and-forth discussion of The Lighthouse. And now, Michael has finally seen it, so we can do that. So, give us some of your thoughts, Michael.
I watched it. I absolutely fell in love with it from the first frame, and it had me mesmerized up until the final frame. It's directed by Robert Eggers, of course, and co-written with him and his brother, Max Eggers.
They also both wrote The Witch, correct?
No, I think just Robert Eggers.
Oh, just Robert Eggers, okay.
Max came up with the idea for a ghost story inside a lighthouse with two men, and this was back in 2012. And Robert Eggers was starting to work on The Witch, and he could not get it financed. He couldn't get it off the ground, so he went and started working on this story with
his brother.
It was around that time that The Witch started getting picked up and started getting interest, so he had to move over to The Witch. By the time he came back to this with his brother, he had found out about this story, a real story from, let's see, it was a story from 1801 about two men trapped in a lighthouse. So he kind of incorporated that into his brother's ghost story, and they wrote it together, and that's how this came about. One of the first things I noticed that I didn't like at first, actually, was the aspect ratio.
It's extremely square. A lot of movies use a more boxy aspect ratio to evoke the past. This is even boxy by those standards. This one is a perfect square, and people have not used that aspect ratio since the 1930s, I believe.
He wanted to take us back before the 1950s, before things became more panoramic. And he wanted to take us back to, like you said, like the 1930s. So the way that was done, he filmed with a black and white camera, and he used lenses dating all the way back from as early as 1918.
As early as 1918?
Yes.
So that's like towards the beginning of the history of film.
And he didn't use any lenses that were older than 1938.
Damn.
So that's what created that aspect ratio, and that's what
it looks vintage.
Yeah, that's what created that look. But with these lenses and this camera, it required 15 to 20 times more light on set. So when we're watching those scenes that are so dark and rich, they were flooded with light on set.
So this had a very unique shooting style. It's probably shot unlike any other film.
Yeah, and I hear that Robert Pattinson and Willem Dafoe could barely even see each other. They were so blinded by the lights that were on them.
As it was, they both had a hard time filming this movie. Apparently they didn't get along. They were always in a bad mood. Robert Eggers was really pushing them to the brink of insanity. And Robert Pattinson has said on record that he wanted to deck out Robert Eggers at one point. He wanted to sock him out because he was getting tired of the grueling conditions.
Yeah.
Robert Pattinson actually ate mud.
Oh, yeah.
To get prepared for the role. So extreme dedication.
And he would gag himself, and he would do all kinds of things.
It was cold on set. It was uncomfortable. The conditions were harsh. The lighting was exaggerated. They couldn't see each other. Everything about this production sounds like a feat of insanity to try to pull off. I don't feel that a lot of filmmakers go for that type of filmmaking anymore. You get it, like a movie like, really odd comparison, but something like Apocalypse Now is comparable to that, where they really went in and started going mad and were forced to shoot under very harsh conditions to get into the role. Yeah. You rarely ever see that type of commitment from director, actors, just that type of commitment from artists. But I feel like since it's a movie about descending into insanity, it captures it more authentically than a controlled, well-oiled set ever could.
Well, they barely spoke on set. and they both chose that not because they were mad at each other or didn't like each other or anything. They just barely spoke. They each had a method where they would isolate themselves from everyone else.
And I think it shows in the performances because they're supposed to be a little bit isolated from each other. They're suspicious of each other and they don't like each other. And it really comes across whenever they're together and they go off on their little, I don't know, verbal duels, as you would call it, verbal dueling.
So, like Robert Eggers was saying, they ended up forming a bond while filming, but it was a bond that was made through tension. And that's what made it so unique to watch on film.
I think it really reflects because they both seem genuinely insane at the time. And the movie feels like, at various points, I feel like the movie feels like it could fly off the rails at any moment, but it never does. It manages to stay cohesive and together, like very tightly controlled insanity.
I was so engrossed in every word that was being said, like very few movies I've ever watched before. Like I was just leaning in. I just wanted to hear everything that was being said. I wanted to know everything that was going on. And I wanted to take in every inch of the screen, every inch of that square frame.
So, but you grew to like the aspect ratio as the movie went on, correct?
Yeah, and like I was telling you before, it almost seemed to open up to me because the scope of the movie felt big to me. So in the times where there was darkness on each side of the frame, it looked like it opened up to me, and it felt like I got further into the lighthouse. Like it almost seemed like the aspect ratio opened up, and it kind of pulled me in a little further. And
but
then
it didn't open up.
Yeah, but it didn't. It was just I just wonder if he did that on purpose, like if he played with the shadows purposely to make it look like that sometimes, or if that was just how it affected me.
I like the aspect ratio because it makes you feel a little bit more confined and intimate with these characters. And that's one of the best things about this movie. It's one location, very small, limited, and 2 actors. So its scope is very small, but it feels larger than life and mythic. You feel like you're watching the creation of a grand myth form before your very eyes. So you still feel the bigness of the world, but you feel the isolation too, being on the lighthouse.
Yeah, you feel the presence of everything outside of the frame, even though you're not seeing it.
And I think a lot of that is to do with its fantastic sound design. It has a really good sound design that really puts you into the soundscape of the lighthouse, of what it would be to be surrounded by crashing winds and roaring sea and that foghorn that just completely goes off every few minutes throughout the entire movie. All adds to its hypnotic quality. Another thing I find interesting about it is you talk about the dialogue. Movies that are this dialogue heavy and this driven by character interaction are rarely this visually driven at the same time, where everything looks like a work of art, and it's almost, I don't want to say Lynchian because there's nothing like this, but for lack of a better word, it kind of captures a certain level of surrealism with its imagery and the lighting and just what you see on screen, but it's very dialogue driven at the same time. So it's the perfect mix between artistic visuals and very meaty dialogue and acting.
Well, the little synopsis they give on IMDb says it perfectly. When it starts, it says it's a hypnotic and hallucinatory tale, and it definitely is.
And like The Shining, it blurs the lines between fantasy and reality. There becomes a point where you're not sure what's supernatural and what's a product of the imagination. My feeling with it, and this is why it reminds me of The Shining, is that it's a very supernatural movie about insanity. So I don't think all of the visions are real, but I do feel that there is some sort of presence in the lighthouse that looms throughout the film, something greater than the characters themselves, that push them to the edge of it pushes both of these characters to the edge of insanity. So a lot of the imagery I don't think is necessarily real. I think some of it's in their head.
Yeah.
But even though it's in their head, it's not just because all of it's in their head. It's because the lighthouse itself is an entity, or has some type of entity within it that is pushing them to this limit. To this limit, like, it doesn't feel the need to show them strange imagery all the time. All it has to do is play with their head. Having said that, there is some very jarring, strange imagery.
Yeah.
One of the recurring things is the mermaid that keeps appearing throughout this film. At once, very sexy and beautiful, but alien, terrifying, cold, and alienating.
Much like that one witch in The Witch, the witch with the red hood on. Mm-hmm. Like she was sexy, beautiful, but something really scary and sinister about her.
That's a good comparison.
That reminded me of the mermaid.
So, what do you think of the acting?
Oh, fucking phenomenal, dude. So many layers to it, and it also felt natural. I never felt like I was watching a guy acting his ass off. Like I was never, I never sat back and was in awe of the acting because I was too engrossed in those characters. I just felt like I was watching this character, and I wanted to watch I wanted to watch every move of both characters. I was equally engrossed in both of their stories and how they intertwined.
Do you think, can you see how this would be a divisive film?
Yeah.
How it's already stirring up a lot of controversy within horror circles because it's another art house horror film, and this one is arguably even artsier and more out there than something like Midsommar,
yeah,
or the Witch. Like, it takes it to an even new extreme.
But I think the quality of it is pretty much undeniable, and the acting performances are undeniable, and the look of it is so rich and original.
It's one of the rare films that actually feels wholly original, that doesn't feel like it's copied from anything else, that feels like it comes completely unfiltered from someone's imagination.
Yeah, you can see the inspirations in there, like from Herman Melville novels and stuff, but you don't see any direct...
See, I sense a little Shining influence in this.
Yeah.
But even then, it's not comparable to The Shining. Despite the obvious influence, it's so different that you could only call it inspiration. I wouldn't say influence. Inspiration, the word that you use, is probably a little bit more apt in describing the influences on the film.
Yeah.
So, The Lighthouse. Do we have a new classic on our hands?
Definitely. It's one of the best movies of the year, and definitely one of the best horror movies of the year. Its cinematic brilliance is just as great as it is just a great horror film. I think it's an undeniable horror film too, even more than The Witch was, because it feels very horrific. The tensions are very high in it.
I feel like for a lot of people, they're not going to consider this horror because within the horror community, there's sometimes a very limited view of what horror is or what it's capable of or what it can be. This is one of those films that opens up the horror genre in terms of what's possible in a horror story and how to make it different or how to make it unique or original. I feel a lot of its uniqueness will make some horror fans feel that they got gypped out of horror.
Yeah.
But that's only if you look at it from a very limited perspective.
Yeah, and I also love the effect it had on me because I could feel their isolation and I could feel how miserable Robert Pattinson's character was having to do all that work and those grueling conditions. But I also loved being there with them. Like I don't know, it's probably just because I was on the outside looking in, but I could feel their isolation. I could feel how miserable they were, but I still loved being there with them. Almost like you love watching people on a sitcom, you know?
I understand what you mean because it's enjoyable to enter that world and be a part of it and experience it without having to participate and dip into the madness.
I made a list of words, what the movie meant to me without spoiling anything.
Okay.
And this is what I came up with. Lighthouse light, foghorn, ocean, masturbation, drunken fights.
Quite a bit of masturbation, actually.
Drunken fights, drunken singing, mermaids, storms, loneliness, secrets, isolation, obsession, regret, and enchanted sea monsters.
That's a very good, apt description. And you know what? None of that actually ruins the movie itself.
Yeah.
And I feel like when we talked about this movie, even though we're both talking about it now, we're speaking about it in very vague terms, only describing the effect, the performances, or what they're like, because it would be too difficult to put into words what this movie is actually like to experience. It's one of those movies that, no, you have to see it for yourself. There's no amount of jibber-jabbering between you and I that could ever truly convey what the film itself is actually like.
Yeah, and in reality, it on the surface, it doesn't go far past the synopsis. But when you delve deeper into it, it's a lot richer than that.
I feel it's a more evocative and emotional piece of storytelling, not necessarily driven by strict logic, driven a little bit by emotions and the cinema itself, where there's something deeper going on, but it's something that could only be experienced through the magic of film. It's not something that's literary. If it were literary, you would need probably a little bit more meat on it for it to fly, but as a piece of cinema, there's a lot of depth to it. There's a lot of layers to what's going on.
Yeah.
It's just the layers that are hard to put into words. Could not work as well as a play because a lot of its strongest aspects and what makes it what it is the filmmaking itself. So I think it's safe to say Mike and I both love it.
Personally, when I watched The Witch, I was like, how could he get any better than this? And then I watched The Lighthouse. Oh, that's how.
And this represents, to me, a fantastic leap for a filmmaker because The Witch, great film, cinematic, scary, but it's a great version of a type of story that we're familiar with, that we've seen done before, just done exceptionally well. This feels like you're seeing a wholly original work of art. This doesn't feel like it has a precedent before it. Has influences, but not a precedent that you could truly compare The Lighthouse to.
Yeah, I thought I'd never seen anything quite like this, and I never felt anything quite like this in a movie.
It gets me excited, really excited for Robert Eggers' career, because as of right now, he's my favorite of the new, not just horror filmmakers, my favorite of the new filmmakers of the past decade. Between The Witch and The Lighthouse, this guy is something special. He's a very unique artist, and I can only imagine what path his career is going to lead him down. For a while, he was talking about the Nosferatu remake. I normally wouldn't be excited because the original one's a masterpiece, and then the Werner Herzog version is that rare version that actually stands up as a masterpiece in its own right.
Yeah.
The idea that you can make a third masterpiece of that story seems a little bit flimsy. But when you add Robert Eggers' name into the equation, it makes total sense. So if anybody else can pull off a successful Nosferatu movie, it's Robert Eggers. Though at this point, because The Lighthouse was so fucking original, I'm not sure if I'd want to see him go in that direction. I would still be excited for it. But because The Lighthouse was such a big step as an artist and such a big step in a new direction, I want to see his original concepts now.
Yeah, and isn't it crazy that we get Ari Aster and Robert Eggers around the same time?
And Jordan Peele.
Yes, just giving us these phenomenal works of art.
Yeah,
in
great.
the horror genre.
And I really loved Midsommar. I did, and I liked Us a lot too. However, I think this is a better film than either of those. And that's saying something because I really, really liked Midsommar a lot. But I think this goes even beyond the artistry of Midsommar, which already was spectacular and top-notch.
Yeah, but part of me even thought after I seen Midsommar, I thought Robert Eggers topped that. And he sure did.
He sure did.
Showed me.
Listen to this podcast, or I'll gouge your eyes out.
I caught up on another film. This one is from Jennifer Kent. She's part of the new wave of the horror renaissance. She made her name off of The Babadook, which along with It Follows and The Witch was a big part of the horror renaissance. Her newest movie isn't really a horror movie. It is called The Nightingale. It takes place in 1865 Australia, and it's about colonialism and how the British colonized this one little island in Australia and spread a lot of racism, rape, and violence, and all around general depravity. The movie stars Aisling Francioski. Oh man, I am so sorry out there for people on the podcast. I hate when I butcher these names. I don't know how to say them right.
Shut your mouth or I'll rip your lips off.
Like I said, this is not a horror movie, but it is fucking horrifying. There are multiple rape scenes throughout the movie. So right away, right off the bat, this already limits its audience because these are very disturbing rape scenes, and there is more than one of them. The movie has a little bit of I spit on your grave elements to it, but done in a much more refined way. The rape scenes there's a few of them. One of them in particular is extremely disturbing, especially because of what's going on during the rape. And what's strange is, well, it all really got under my skin and it made me feel really uncomfortable. And it's going to turn a lot of people off, and I feel that's understandable. Even Jennifer Kent has come out and said, I understand if not everybody has the stomach to sit through this movie. I get it. She's not offended by the fact that a lot of people actually walked out of it during film festivals. Because what this movie does is it takes the realities of life in 1865 and puts them on the screen in a way that is unprettied, completely raw. She does not make any attempts to pretty up the picture or to make it look like, just soften it up for modern audiences. It is a brutal, unfiltered, raw look at the horrors of colonialism. The rape scenes are, strangely enough, they never feel gratuitous. It feels like this is actually the world that they live in. This is how it would be.
It was part of that colonization.
Yeah, it was part of the colonization. And as we know through history, a lot of these events did happen. A lot of the men who were involved in this were very violent, entitled, extremely racist. So the movie revolves around the revenge of a young woman named Claire. She's an Irish woman. She was rescued from prison by a British soldier, and in doing so, she was able to finish her debt serving the British soldier instead of working out her debt in prison. However, he keeps her long past the point of where she's already paid for her crime. She's supposed to be let go. And the only reason that she was in prison was for petty theft. So he keeps her so he could take advantage of her, so he could rape her, and she's married. And at some point in the movie, and I don't feel this is a spoiler just because this is a big part of when you hear about the movie and when it's being talked about, it revolves around her rape in front of her husband, and it is one of the most fucking disturbing, shocking things. You see the horror of what it must be like to be raped, and at the same time the horror of watching your loved one suffering in such a way that you can't do anything about. And there's one particular moment during the rape scene that is so brutal and so shocking and so heart-dropping that I felt myself go numb as I was looking at the screen. And the instant I went numb, you could see the film did something with the actress where you heard a little sound go off and you saw this look in her eyes where she just gave up. And you could see the numbness seeping into the reality of the situation. So I actually felt like I was in that room. And it's a really harsh experience. She goes off hunting the men who raped her, and she's pitiless in her revenge. She takes a black man who goes by the name of Blackbird. He's kind of her guide. Back in the day, a lot of the British colony would take advantage of the black people, the natives that were the natives of this island in Australia, and use them to track them around. But they also treated them inhumanely. They hung them. They did everything from slitting their throats to beheading them to treating them like shit. The racism that's portrayed in this movie is really harsh, and it's a little bit off-putting, but it also feels very honest. It puts her and this black man who has his own history with colonialism and how his whole family was murdered in front of his eyes, go on a journey together. And it's one of those movies that's so complex where even though you're sympathizing with the main character because of what she's gone through, she herself is racist. And she treats him like shit. She treats her guide like shit. And through their journey, they start to realize that they actually have a lot more in common with each other than they don't. And they get to see the bullshit of what they've been taught about racism, about the differences between people. And it's strangely, in a way, kind of a moving story about them going on this journey together. But, like I said, the journey is filled with brutal revenge, and they really end up taking a liking to each other, and you end up caring for them both as people, and they're both able to expose each other to the flaws of their own thinking. Not only do you get to experience the world through a woman's point of view, how horrifying it was, how men would just grab women and rape them at their own will, you get to experience the terror of what it would feel like to be a black person dealing with the British colonizers, how they just shoot them on sight. They string them up. They like to hang them. They do play cruel, mocking games with them. For a lot of people, it's going to be a bit much. And I like the messiness of the movie. During a lot of the revenge scenes, you could tell that it's not pleasant to kill somebody. The revenge is very harsh. Even when you stab somebody a bunch of times and puts them through torture, you see how hard it is to do something like that. And it's one of those rare occasions where in a movie, you're actually rooting for her to get her revenge on those men because it's so awful, but you feel bad for her at the same time as she's committing these savage acts, because you start to get the sense that she herself doesn't really enjoy doing this.
Yeah.
And she herself doesn't like that being in the position that she has forced her to become a vicious human being beyond what she thought she was capable of. So the violence of it is harsh, and it makes you mournful at the same time while feeling like it was deserved. Where like, yes, these guys really did deserve to be killed and slaughtered for what they did to her, but fuck, isn't it really sad that she had to compromise her own soul to the point where she became something that was unrecognizable to her as a human being? And it's not a horror movie in the traditional sense, but I felt it was a lot more horrifying than Babadook. And at the same time, it's not so bleak that when you walk away from the movie you feel like shit. You feel like part of it is a tribute to human resilience in the face of the most unspeakable, awful things that you could ever experience. Somewhat like Tigers Are Not Afraid,
Yeah.
but a lot more harsh and ruthless. Absolutely top-notch film. Jennifer Kent gets the period down. The acting is phenomenal. The situations are powerful. It's extremely disturbing. It's emotionally endearing. It's draining. It's messy. It's complicated. And Jennifer Kent is not afraid to frame things in a way that make you question the validity of all of it. Nobody in this movie is 100% good or 100% bad. Even the good people that you're rooting for are deeply flawed and have their own human fallacies. And the better of these people learn by the end of the movie from their fallacies, and the worst of them learn nothing from it. One of my favorite movies of 2019 actually. And shows Jennifer Kent is another one of those filmmakers that you just have to look out for, because she's created a raw, unsparing portrait of colonialism unlike any I've ever seen in a film before.
So it's a fictional story told set during a real event, right?
Yes, it's a fictional story, but from what I understand, the type of rapes that happen in this movie, and they actually go to different women. They throughout the movie, they actually pick women out from the jungle and just take them away and just rape them and plunder. Stuff like that happened a lot back then.
Yeah, and it's a part of pretty much every colonization, every genocide. It's all a part of it.
It was released this year in theaters in the U.S., but it traveled on the festival circuit in 2018, and we're finally getting to see it now. It's available on Hulu right now. If you have Hulu in the US, you could actually stream it for free. I think you could rent it on video on demand.
Listen to this podcast, or I'll stab your eardrums with an ice pick.
The next movie we're going to talk about, we both watched. It's another 2019 movie, Haunt. It's written and directed by Scott Beck and Brian Woods. They're the writers of A Quiet Place. It's about a girl with an abusive... It centers around a girl with an abusive boyfriend who goes out with 5 of her friends to an extreme haunt on Halloween. And this is yet another horror film where horror fans get punished. It's interesting character interactions for a while, and it got me invested. Ultimately, it became really low energy. It's a fairly basic slasher, so it should have been more fun than it was. It was too low energy to be a basic slasher. It should have had more creativity in it. One hint in particular, you remember the mouth rip where they ripped this guy's mouth open?
Oh yeah, I remember that.
They come up and he's faced against the killer. They don't show a hit. They don't show anything. They just show the next scene. The guy is knocked out, so he can be still for his mouth to be ripped open. It was still a crude effect. So I didn't see, not showing a hit, not showing him hit the ground, not showing what made him incapacitated, and then just having him still for the mouth rip. It comes along, the abusive boyfriend comes to the rescue, and then he's kind of just wasted. And I didn't see any need for that storyline.
Don't you think it was only a matter of time before these types of this trend would set into horror? Because haunts are such a big thing now.
Yeah.
And we've even talked about them on the podcast before. It's when you go to like a haunt, like not a real haunted house, but a setup where it's designed to scare you and fuck with you. Some people have a hard time making it through them. Some of them are so intense that you actually have to get a physical to go through them.
Yeah.
And if you stop and think about it, why haven't there been horror movies about that before? Because that's the perfect horror scenario, because you're in a place where you're supposed to be experiencing horror as something fun.
Yeah.
There's nothing more terrifying than to realize that the haunt that you entered, you thought it was fun, is actually populated by sickos and by actual fucking psychotic people. So I think it was only a matter of time before this thing became a trend. And we're going to talk about that a little bit further after this movie with another film, but that'll be safe for after. I actually really like this movie. I do see some of your complaints. I do think the boyfriend subplot was unnecessary. I understand what you mean about the kill. However, for me, I thought it was a very good use of the space that they were provided. It gave me a palpable sense of dread and anxiety as I was watching the movie. The way that the scenarios play out, maybe it's just because I really tried to imagine what it would be like to be in a haunt that's like that, and it started actually freaking me out, and I put myself in the position of having to deal with trying to get out of a maze that's rigged for you to fail. I really enjoyed it. I think a lot of it's very basic as far as being a slasher movie. It's not very original, but I thought it was fairly well done in its mechanics and how it used its space to give a sense of anxiety or dread. There's one particular scene. This might be a personal thing because I hate spiders. I have a really intense fear of spiders. So there's a scene with the coffin and a bunch of spiders that actually made my heart race really bad. I feel like it did a good job in playing on a lot of the fears that you would a lot of people's fears, and putting you in a situation where you have to face them in a very uncomfortable way. I'm not going to say what it is, but I liked the faces. You'll know what I mean when you see it too.
The masks or the faces?
The faces.
That's what's kind of weird too. Like some of the masks are kind of cool, but kind of generic, and then the masks come off, and then there's some kind of deformity underneath.
Overall, I thought it was pretty engaging. I thought it was well made. I thought it functioned like a fun house, like what it is, like a little maze that you go through. You feel the tension, you have a lot of fun, you go through it, and it genuinely affected me. It gave me a sense of anxiety. I don't think it's particularly original. I just thought it was a very well executed little film that certainly does have its flaws, but not enough for me not to enjoy it. I had fun with this one.
Well, I actually wasn't surprised when I heard it was from the writers of The Quiet Place, because it's all so quiet. It's all so subtle and so serious. And it had its moments, but just the overall energy was too low. And I thought the haunted...
It is pretty serious, yeah.
Yeah, and I thought the haunted attraction was actually poorly designed. It wasn't very nice to look at. And so it ended up resulting in not enough visuals to keep it entertaining for me.
I like some of the visuals in it, like when they're first walking through. When they first enter the haunted house, they walk through this area where it looks like you're walking further and further into space as everything around you starts, I don't know, what is it, cycling in a circle?
Yeah.
I do think some of the haunted house look cheap, but for me that helped to sell the fact that they would buy that this isn't a real place, because look at some of the fucking way that's designed.
Yeah. And
I think for me that worked when you realize that, the fakeness of some of this haunted house was a ruse to make it seem like you're really safe.
Yeah.
So,
but one thing I noticed too, these were like menacing villains when they were killing helpless victims. They were menacing villains, but once any victim stood up to them, they were kind of weak. Mm-hmm. Like the final girl makes quick work of that big bad monster with all the tattoos. She kind of hit him a couple times and he went down and he was done. He wasn't even a challenge for her, and then every key moment just seemed to come like that. It seemed to be build up, and then it just happened nonchalantly, and then all the villains seemed really weak when challenged. So I just had more problems with it than I did what I'd like.
One thing I did find strange was the ending. I don't want to ruin the ending, but it's abrupt. Yeah. And it's hard to tell if it's real or not, or if the character got ready that fast for this big event that was about to happen.
Yeah.
It was kind of satisfying, kind of not. I don't know how to put, if that makes sense. There's a part of it that feels right, but it feels like you probably should have did that, but you should have executed it a little bit differently, almost as if they blew their whole load on all the suspense of the haunted house itself.
Yeah.
And the finale was a very quick afterthought.
It was also a disservice to this movie that I watched Funhouse Massacre, which is this type of idea done to perfection of what I personally like. Mm-hmm. And so it ended up making Haunt feel like Funhouse Massacre, but with all the fun and energy and originality taken out of it.
So nothing particularly original, but for me, something that was very effective in inducing a sense of anxiety throughout most of its runtime.
Listen to this podcast, or I'll gouge your eyes out.
The next movie we watched ended up having the same problem with me, but I actually ended up liking it a little more than Haunt.
I liked Haunt a little bit more than this one. The next one we're going to talk about is Hell House LLC from 2015 or 2016?
2015, yeah.
2015.
This is one I promised to watch last week because I put this in thinking... Because all the time, people have been talking about this for a while, and I thought the whole time, I watched it, but it was actually Fear Inc. that I watched. So, as I promised, I went back to watch this one.
I kind of really like it a lot at times, and other times I really don't like it.
Yeah, with this one, just like Haunt, it had a lot of moments that I liked, and then I had quite a few problems with it, but... This one was, the scales were tipped the other way. There was more that I liked about it than I disliked. And mostly the third act is where it fell apart. Up until then, I thought it was a solid build-up. The way it opened up with the documentary was really solid. Like I said, the build-up was well done. The natural acting, some scenes were actually pretty scary and made me jump a little bit. I don't jump at movies anymore, and I actually jumped a couple times on that one. And then I love how they told the ghost story late in the movie. Like, it's very inconspicuous. Like, what happened in here? And it's a mystery. And you see little glimpses of YouTube videos that people posted of people just rioting and trying to get out. And it's all this buildup, and you think something's very menacing is coming. And then when it comes, it's just kind of a mess.
See, this is where I would start breaking down why I responded more to Haunt a little more than Hell House LLC. Whereas Haunt... some of the complaints about it, it was a more consistently anxiety-inducing movie from my experience. However, the best, scariest parts of Hell House LLC are actually quite a bit scarier than the best parts of Haunt. But I felt that was a more even movie that, for me, felt the tension almost the entire runtime. This is a movie that went in fits and starts for me, and its third act is my biggest problem, is that there's some shit in here that is genuinely freaky, that it actually had me going, oh my god, holy shit, where I actually jumped at it. Like, genuinely scary stuff going on in this movie. There's also parts that are very... take the aspects of found footage movies, the worst possible aspect of it, and pump it up to 11. And I am thinking about the main event of the movie. And this is where I get a lot of problems with the movie, is that there's a lot of good scenes throughout that slowly build up what's going on in this motel that they rent it out to use as a haunt. Yeah. Where it's fucking scary as shit. And it's all building up to the big event where the casting crew is finally going to open up the haunt to the public, where everybody's going to go. And this is when the big massacre happened, the big event of the movie. And when it happens, it is so jumbled. It's so hard to look at. It's so hard to see anything that's going on that I just started getting irritated and a little bit frustrated, because you had some stuff going on here and I could tell there might be something fucking creepy going on, but damn, that camera is so damn shaky. It's so blurry. It comes from so many different perspectives. I couldn't tell who was running from what anymore. I couldn't tell who was holding the camera. You could tell there was something freaky going on in the room. And I like they did something better earlier in the movie where they have a strobing effect and they're testing it out. Yeah. And that scene works really well because your eye starts to play tricks on you, because the light goes in and out and you see things moving here and there, where it's a little bit confusing, but you see just enough for it to creep you out and know that something's off in the room. This one, the strobing is so aggressive and the camera swings so wildly all over the place, and it keeps switching different perspectives of different people's camera footage that they edit together, that it's just a big fucking jumbled mess. None of it's coherent. None of it's visual. It's visually incoherent and hard to comprehend what's going on. And it totally just drained so much of what it had going up for me up to that point. That ending just felt, that big main event just felt wrong. And then the movie after that keeps going in and out. And some of the scenes that come after the main event are kind of effective, but you keep feeling that the movie ends and then it starts up again. And it ends and it keeps starting up over and over. Where by the end, the structure of this movie started to feel unwieldy and a little bit ungainly. So my biggest problems with it are the third act. It just starts to go off the rails. And even though there's some good stuff in the third act, it doesn't remain the level of consistency of everything that preceded it.
Yeah, and it was such a letdown for me in the third act because there was so much I enjoyed about the rest of it, and I love this cast, very endearing cast, and I like the way they
I liked all the
acted.
characters too,
And
believable interactions.
Yeah, the characters felt genuine. They felt like they knew each other. I felt their struggle of trying to get this place going because it's like the one guy who's the leader kind of dragged everybody to this remote location where they usually do it within the city. They rent out a building. They
Not knowing anything about the building's history either.
Yeah. So they usually rent out buildings in the city and then just do something within the city. But this time they decided to go to one that was rumored to be really haunted, but they didn't really know the history of it. And that's another reason why you don't learn the history of it until about the middle of it. And I really liked that. And it was building up to so much, and then kind of got a little convoluted at the end and a little confusing.
It got convoluted and confusing, and well, I can accept a lot from found footage. It can also become an excuse for lazy, incoherent camera work, and you could just say, well, it was supposed to be chaotic. I'm like, I get that, but this is still a movie, and I can't fucking see anything that's going on. Therefore, the tension is all gone. That I felt very frustrated by the big event that the movie was leading up to, because before that, they did a damn good job of generating genuine scares and chills and placing and slowly letting the suspense build up throughout the runtime.
The YouTube video that they showed at the beginning is similar to the end, where it's everybody packing into and it worked then because you didn't know what happened. You think later on you're going to see what happened, so everybody's all packed up together, and you think, oh shit, what's in the room? This is creepy, but we're going to get to see what's in there later. And then it gets there, and it's the same thing. It's everybody piled up together, and everybody screaming, and you kind of hear a growl somewhere, but kind of not. And is somebody being killed or?
Yeah. So for me, it fell apart in its third act. However, I would still give it a mild recommendation. Just because it does have a lot of good stuff in there, and its scariest parts are the parts of it that work really, really well, and the parts that don't work really don't work.
And I liked it enough to be interested in part 2 and 3 because I believe it's done by the same writer-director. And I would like to see him maybe fix some of the stuff that went wrong with the first one in this second and third one. Because the second one's supposed to involve an investigative journalist comes to breaks in the house and investigates it, and she gets mixed up in it. And then the third one is supposed to be somebody's going to put on another haunted house.
So we're going to have to check those ones out eventually. The new one's from this year.
Yeah, new one just came out this year, so I have to watch it by the end of the year for our list and see if it's got a place in there. I don't know. The list is filling up now with 2019 movies. I got worried for a while, but my 2019 list of
all the best movies always come out towards the end of the year, no matter what genre they're in.
Yeah.
They come out towards the end of the year these days.
And we are basking in the greatness of it now.
Yeah, this is actually my favorite time of the year for movies in general. I feel like this is when you get flooded with a lot of the highest quality work from throughout the year. I feel like a lot of studios, not everything, mind you, certain great projects slip through the cracks every year, and you see them all throughout the year. But I feel a lot of studios hoard their what they know to be their highest quality stuff to flood it at the end of the year when everybody wants to do awards and lists.
Yeah,
the prestige.
Yeah, but what we're used to is the Oscar bait and stuff. All those movies coming up at the end of the year, but now it's horror that's coming up at the end of the year too, close to award season.
Yes, and horror is getting just as prestigious. I actually, before we close out, I wanted to mention this article from IndieWire. The article is written by David Ehrlich, and I'm actually not a fan of this writer because I think some of the stuff that he writes is a little bit quacky, and I'm not a fan of moral offense or people who take moral offense to things. And his review of the Joker for me was very laughable, really laughable. It was kind of dumb actually, but he did write an interesting article about how he believes that Ari Aster, Robert Eggers, and Jordan Peele are the horror genre. Those three filmmakers are what's rescuing original filmmaking in Hollywood. He says it seems like the new wave of horror films is going to be redemption for original movies in Hollywood. Filmmakers would talk about the Lighthouse, Midsommar, and Us. Hell, in the article, he discusses how unique those three movies are, and to have them all be such financial successes to varying degrees off of mid to low budgets with no IP, no branding, no built-in fan base, non-franchise, to have this much creativity, daring, and vision come out in original films and being successful, that these are the guys who are saving Hollywood, that the new creativity in Hollywood can be found within the horror genre. And I feel like horror is becoming, it's becoming better and better. Like, I really think this decade is probably the strongest decade in horror since the 80s or 70s, and it's in a completely different direction. It's not like the 80s and 70s horror films. It's something a little bit new. It's something a little bit different. But this has been a fucking standout decade for horror movies. And despite the fact that I think that he's an occasionally ridiculous in some of his views, I agree with David Ehrlich on this 100%. It is horror that is saving the originality in Hollywood right now.
And I didn't even like Us, and I agree with him 100%. And I realized the impact it had on the horror genre, a positive one.
Even if you're not a fan of Us, you can't deny that it's bold, it's original, and it's very ballsy to make a big, mainstream, big-budget film that experimental, that personal, and that audacious. So whatever you think of any of them, whether it's Midsommar, The Lighthouse, Us, this could only be a good thing for not just for the horror genre, but for filmmakers in general. Anybody else out there who's trying to get an original vision funded, these guys are proving that you could do it.
And filmmakers like us are going to reap all the benefits.
Yes.
As always, you guys don't forget to watch our show. Again, like we said last week, we're on a little bit of a hiatus now, but we did decide we're coming back on December 6th.
4 more episodes, folks.
Yeah, 4 more episodes this season, and we're really working to make it impressive and make it entertaining for you guys. So watch Friday, December 6th. Check out, starting then, our last 4 episodes of the season of Pickle's Horror Show on American Horrors.
And in the podcast description, I will put where to watch it. So just follow directions on the podcast.
Cool. So check out our Facebook page, facebook.com/Pickles Horror Show, or Instagram @Pickles Horror Show. And happy horror, everyone.
Happy horror.